Hello, everyone, and welcome to your daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. I am Jer Stays, and it is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation about the past, present, and future of the Renaissance Center. I know I did. I learned a lot. It was a great trip down memory lane. But first, we need to pay a bill, and then we'll just jump right into it.
As we all live longer, age really is just a number. But retirement is so much more than one. Your Metro Detroit Edward Jones financial advisors want to know what you want out of your retirement, so we can help get you there. Call us toll-free at 866-975-8655. Again, that's 866-975-8655 to schedule an appointment. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
Joining me in the studio at Techtown, Mark Nickita. He's an architect and urban designer, co-founder and president of the firm Archive DS, as well as so many hats, former mayor of Birmingham, I think a self-described urbanist, and somebody who has been either living or working in or having a hand in things with the city for years. And you posted some interesting things on Facebook about the Renaissance Center. You've had some interesting ideas. I wanted to talk to you and kind of unpack it more, the past, present, and future of this building and this complex that I think it's just captured people's imaginations because things are going to change with it one way or another. Things are going to change. Mark, why don't we spend a few minutes on the past of the RenCen, because it was not always this kind of stark structure, especially interiorly, that it is today.
Well, thanks for having me, and glad to be here and talk about Detroit. Of course, it's always an exciting topic in my mind. The Renaissance Center, obviously a big icon for the city and has always been, going all the way back to the early days where it was conceptualized and we saw the big images of what it will be. And I think so many people were very excited about having it come to the city, and there was a lot of discussion about what it would bring and how it would impact the city at a time where the city was having its really noticeable declining period was beginning in the late 60s, early 70s. There was obviously a lot of concern about where the city was going, and something like this was, as it was named, was to be a rebirth element, something to really inject a certain amount of life to a city that was faltering a bit, and hence the name Renaissance Center, which was a big competition. What should it be named and all that, and that came out of that. So there's a lot of interest and excitement about it. And I remember the early days of going there. The kinds of elements that were there were really the height of the building, really talked about by, I think, the region. People are excited about it. The interior space, the big lobby, this high ceiling open with skylights and pods and water and all that was a big part of the draw. And there was nothing like that in the city at all. That really, other than some historic buildings like the Fisher Building, Guardian Building, which had these grand interior spaces, this being more modern, more contemporary, completely different than those historic buildings, was meant to be this injection of something that was really going to bring the beginning of the next phase of Detroit, if you will. And people were excited about it.
There's a large chunk of our listeners who don't know the building before General Motors took it over. And I distinctly, as a kid, remember the smell of water. And I remember green. And, these are faint memories, but it was a whole different experience, and even had a lot of retail. A number of listeners were like, hey, I'd love to see something like Somerset downtown. I'd love to see high-end retail and all this stuff.
I think a lot of people don't realize that it was really a much more mixed-use building originally as it was conceptualized. They had the office and hotel component and then the retail component, but there was a whole residential component along the waterfront that was intended to be sort of condominiums or rental housing or whatever along the water. That's actually why the big parking lot was in the front of the building for many, many years, because that was intended to be a whole series of of waterfront residences, which that never came to be. So it was this leftover spot that was supposed to be for housing that never got built, and eventually became the plaza, the General Motors Plaza, and that whole waterfront element, which came obviously much, much, much later. For many years, it was the best parking spot. The cars had the best view in the entire region, right? Because cars were parked there looking out on Windsor and the river. But going back to retail, yes, the original retail concept was that it was going to be a very high level established retail. It was kind of like a Somerset Mall in Detroit, and the original set of retailers that was there were very high end, and Cartier was one, and I think there were a number of others that are of that level of high level retail that were there. And that was the original intent. That was part of the hotel, which was, sort of a higher end hotel, and the office was meant to be the premier office space in the region. And actually, it was designed to be such that many businesses left the core of downtown to move there because they wanted to be in the greatest, highest level, highest quality, with these great stores and retail and restaurants and things. Then you had the restaurant at the top of the tower, the views of the city and all that. So it was really a very exciting time, and it drew a lot of people there initially.
Is this another project? I think about the Fisher Building and others where there was a bigger plan on the drawing board than what happened?
Absolutely. The original concept, not only just the housing along the water, which was never built, but the original 5 towers, the hotel and the four office towers, was just the beginning phase. The intention was that there would be a whole series of smaller towers of the size of the sort of 20-story towers on the side, which we now have 2. Ultimately, a couple of years later, 2 were built. But the intention was to have, I think, 8 on the one side and 4 on the other side, or 4 or 6 on the other side. I'm talking about significantly more office than we actually built. So the project was considered to be a multi-phase, multi-year development, and was intended originally to be significantly bigger.
There's been a lot of criticism of the design of this building, and I feel like that also kind of, reflects the architect, John Portman, right? He is the architect. He's no longer with us. He had a very unique style of designing buildings.
Yeah, he did a number of buildings, and there was a certain, design approach and elements that he had established as part of his palette, if you will. And this is not uncommon with, some architects like Mies van der Rohe. And there's a whole series of architects that they have kind of a palette of design elements that they will use, and you'll see them. And Richard Meyer would always had the white buildings. That's not uncommon. And Portman had that established a few sort of elements that many of which he had actually initiated because he's from Atlanta, which was his home base, and he had developed the Peachtree Plaza, which was one of the the early large scale projects that he did, among a few other buildings in Atlanta. He did a number of buildings in Atlanta. And the Peachtree Plaza, if you look at it, is basically the center tower of the RenCen Center. It's a circular hotel that's about 70 stories. It's almost a duplicate of what we then built here. So that was the part of the element. If you go to the lobby of the Peachtree Plaza in Atlanta, it's very much like the lobby of the RenCen Center. It has multi-floors, and it has the sort of pods that come out. It's this brutalist concrete, corrugated concrete element. That's the sort of material that he used. And then he did a similar building in Los Angeles, the Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles. Looks a lot like the RenCen Center at a smaller scale. The interior lobby is very similar to what we have here. And then he also did similar things in San Francisco, where he did the Embarcadero Center and the Hyatt there. So it was a lot of his sort of palette came here. But this was, I think, his biggest, for sure, one of his biggest, if not the biggest project that he had done, surely at that time and maybe ever, in terms of one big single project. He did a number of sort of additional projects in other cities, but this was one big one. And it feels when you go to Atlanta, you go to the Bunker Hill in L.A., you go or Bonaventure in L.A., or you go to Embarcadero, you definitely you feel like the palette is there. You definitely can experience the elements of what we now know as the RenCen Center.
General Motors did a pretty big renovation. I want to say, what was it, 96?
96, 97.
How did that renovation change the language of the building and get us on the path to where we are today?
General Motors invested a significant amount, and I think they bought the building for a lesser amount and then put a lot into it, hundreds of millions of dollars, frankly, over time.
So listeners know this, General Motors shifting around greater downtown is not a new thing, because General Motors world headquarters for a long time was across from the Fisher Building.
When they moved downtown, that was a big move. The intent was to really take on the RenCen Center, and I think, going back to the original, this excitement for the RenCen Center over time, and it didn't take long, that sort of that excitement waned a bit when people started going to the RenCen Center. The big retail push in the beginning started to go away. Obviously, Cartier and those other stores weren't really suited for that location and ultimately left. And the retail changed, and I guess the excitement of the RenCen Center waned a bit. And that was part of when General Motors came in, which was nearly 20 years later, right? Because the building was opened in 77. So nearly 20 years, General Motors comes in. And part of the criticism and the sort of challenge of the building over time, they tried to address directly with their investment. And of course, that's getting lost in the building, the fact that you're internalized design, so you're sort of focused internally. You don't really have a sense of the river or downtown or outside, what's going on out there. And that was a big part of, I guess, one of the big criticisms, in that people would go in and they'd get lost. And, I'm supposed to go to Tower 100 and I don't know how to get there. And three things that they did, which were really big moves, and it not without a lot of cost, was taking the ring, the sort of elevated circular element that allowed you to traverse the circular area and the four towers and the center tower easier and more directly, because you would get lost if you went in the other part of it. That was a big circulatory sort of change, which was their intent originally. We need to address the ability for people to traverse this in a manner where it was more comfortable and easy to do. The second thing was opening up the river to the center, so that you would have a sense of direction and a sense of, people don't realize when you're in a building, getting a sense of a direction is just simply being able to look out the window and see, oh, there's that building, or even seeing the sun come in, or it gives you some sense of north, south, east, west, or a landmark or something like that. When you were in the RenCen Center years ago, you couldn't see anything outside because it was so introverted, and the light coming in from the top is even confusing because you don't see east to west so much. You just see light coming in, and you can't see the downtown building. So the Penobscot building, the Garden, these towers were right there, which would help orient you. You couldn't see them. There was no way to look out, and of course, you couldn't see the river, which is a big, that's a big landmark as well. So all of these things were missing, and part of what General Motors did was take down the wall to the south, which is on the riverside, open it up to the Winter Garden, which would be this big, not only a big element that was not part of the building, so you would orient yourself toward that big element being the big, giant, multi-story atrium with, the glass coming in. But then you could see Windsor. You could see the river. You could, now you're orienting yourself. Oh, that must be south, or that's toward there. And therefore, you can start to get your sense of where you're at. That was a big changer, game changer as well. And then, of course, the Jefferson side, opening up that whole thing, because it used to be just a sort of a big concrete wall and doors, at the lower level that you just would walk in, and then you'd have to work your way toward the center. But now you had this big opening and you had this big glass element, and they took down the big berms that were there, which were heating and cooling systems that were part of these, 30-foot high concrete elements.
But it also functioned as a visual way to create a fortress.
Well, it definitely looked like a fortress. It surely did. They had function. It wasn't just a wall or anything, but it felt like a wall. It looked like a wall. And that was a huge expense because it was part of the mechanical system of the building. And they had to lower it and drop it into the lower area and take it out. So that wasn't just an aesthetic change. That was a huge functional change. It cost a lot of money. So that was all part of this. So General Motors put a huge amount of investment in to change those fundamental big ideas. And they moved the needle definitely from where it was to, where it has been and what we know it as now. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much more difficult I think the city the building was in the city.
Well, 1995 is a lifetime ago for some people. There's people listening to this thing who would never know those kind of facts and those kind of experiences.
So it's kind of interesting because it's 20 years, right? The original building, then 20 years later, General Motors gets it and does these huge changes. And now 20 years later, General Motors is leaving, and now we're talking about what the next step is for this building.
And let's get into that next step, because I think there's so many opinions on this that range the entire gamut. There's such a variety of experiences and a variety of feelings with this thing. But I think we have to start this conversation with the idea that there's going to have to be some huge level investment one way or another, whatever gets done to move this thing forward, because there's still more work to do.
Let's just say if we want to do it right, and if we want it to truly be a contributing part of the city in a positive way that it really is going to make a difference, then I think it's going to take, kind of all hands on deck to do that. And when I say that is I mean that, the current group that's looking at, which from what we understand is General Motors continues to own it, and they're going to continue to look at, moving it to the next direction, next position. And now we have Bedrock somehow involved in partnering with them. I'm not sure the circumstance that they have.
I guess they're doing research for a year.
Yeah, they're working together to identify where it will go. They have a lot of recent experience to do, large projects in the city, and General Motors is partnering with them in some capacity. So that's a great, knowledgeable, and experienced group that can move the needle. I don't believe we should demolish the building. That's straight out without question. There's just too much invested in that building and too much. It's got its own zip code. This is not something you can easily erase.
So not even a partial demolition and give us a hotel like they have in the other place? Or?
Well, I would say I'm not suggesting that there can't be alterations that could be significant. I think that we need a great hotel. I think we need a convention hotel, which is what this is. A convention hotel means a large hotel that has convention type space within it. I'm talking about, big ballrooms and breakout session rooms and all that.
And we need a lot of hotel rooms. At least I'm told by everybody that we need a lot more.
But I think that the more logical thing is to do some type of adaptive reuse of part or all of the 4 towers that are they're perimeter towers. And I think that there's opportunity to do other things around the site, the parking decks to the east, doing something further with what's going on there. I think the bigger question to me is how can we connect what's south of Jefferson to the rest of our vibrant and activated downtown that's growing and developing nicely on a daily basis. Right now, we have a very active downtown environment. South of Jefferson, whether it's the RenCen Center, whether it's the Cobo Hall Convention Facility, whether it's Hart Plaza, is really very disconnected from everybody in the downtown core. It's very disconnected. And, even at lunch and the most beautiful day you can think of, walking to the Hart Plaza with a bag, with your lunch and going and sit there is just not really an option. You're going to Capitol Park, you're going to Harmony Park, you're going to Campus Martius. There's so many other great places. Now Beacon Park, you got Grand Circus Park. We have so much going in the city core. To cross Jefferson is an incredible, difficult chore. And that's part of the problem with the Renaissance Center. It's part of the problem with Hart Plaza. That's why it's empty most of the time during the week.
It had fallen into some disrepair. I'm glad to see some of the work happening ahead of the draft. I'm very excited to see in person the Dodge Fountain, the Hart Plaza Fountain, come back to life. Like, I have so many great memories of that. It's beautiful, but that we still got to get people to it, and we need to think about how are we going to plan that space, and then what do we use with those towers? So why don't we expand a bit more on maybe some of the ideas maybe that you have to make that a little bit better?
This is an opportunity to really rethink the whole waterfront circumstance, meaning the Renaissance Center. how it's connected to the city, which it isn't very well, Jefferson, how it's connected to the riverfront, not the front door out of the Winter Garden is one way, but connecting to the rest going east. There's land there, development opportunity. There's parking decks. It's more parking than we need. So how do you use that more? Is there opportunity? There's vacant land there that could be housing. It could be development of any number of sorts. And to the west, which is going toward Hart Plaza, the connection to Hart Plaza is very weak. You walk along Jefferson or you walk along the river and there's this 20-foot little slit along the river really that you walk on. It's not terribly pleasant. I mean, you're on the water, but you're walking by parking lots and by
there's a police
substation there.
there.
Exactly. And then you have the Ford Auditorium site, which is this huge site in a beautiful location that's sitting empty. There's nothing on it. There's no plan for it. That's a development site. There's opportunity to do housing there. Could be any number of things. So the whole connection to Hart Plaza is completely underutilized and has a phenomenal opportunity. So I look at this as an opportunity to connect. We just invested another $200 million in the Cobo Hall Huntington Place, redevelopment. It's a phenomenal asset. The problem is that we don't have the whole waterfront that's all sort of cooking at the highest level. We have this disconnected series of elements that don't really connect to where the people are.
I love the Detroit riverfront. I do. And I get why it gets plaudits. But I got to tell you, when I go down to, say, the riverfront in Chicago or something, there's so much more life. And what I mean by that is vendors. I mean just different types of people, different things happening other than, because the riverfront as we have it now is great for exercising. It's great for that purpose. But all the other life parts, like living right next to it, walking your dog just down from downstairs or something, there are so many pieces that are still able to be added to this riverfront. I don't think we're done yet, is my opinion.
Definitely not done yet. I think we're doing a phenomenal job making it much, much better all the time, and we've added
and it was
this
a big
park
deal to get so many of those pieces together, and that had to happen. And I'm not trying to take away from anybody's work. I just think we're not done yet.
I absolutely agree, and I don't think the people involved will say that they're done. I mean, I think clearly there's a lot more that is being planned and is work. The whole Ralph Wilson Park is going to be a phenomenal anchor on the west side. That's almost done. It'll be done, in the next year or so, and that'll be another asset. And then we've connected along the riverfront towers so that whole connection. There's a lot to be done yet. We've done a lot. It's phenomenal. We're winning awards all the time as the best waterfront and all that. But I feel like Hart Plaza is an opportunity waiting to be completely revisited. And I think there's already been talk about that, and there's already ideas that are there. But this opportunity of connecting, of doing something with Hart Plaza, investing in that, making it not only a better public space, but also activating it with some of the things you need to activate it with. I mean, I'm talking about, incorporating new development there, buildings, housing. There's all kinds of things that can happen there. And then making the Renaissance Center part of that entire sort of complex and helping to connect the Renaissance Center to the downtown better and to the waterfront better and the east and west. I think Jefferson, frankly, and to be specific, needs to be calmed, as we like to use it, or we call it a road diet. I think it's significantly wider than it needs to be. I think it's 8 lanes to 10 lanes, depending on where you count. We don't need, I think the capacity is nowhere near what we're built out for. I think the opportunity of really calming that street and taking it down is pretty significant. A good example of that, if you've been to San Francisco after the 1989 earthquake, the Embarcadero along the waterfront, right there, is right in front of the ferry building at the foot of Market Street in downtown San Francisco, was a boulevard with 2 levels of on top of it, 2 levels of a freeway, an east-west and an east-west freeway, a lower level and upper level, one way each way. Huge amount of car capacity on that. And when the earthquake happened, it collapsed. It had structural issues. There was a big question of rebuilding it versus tearing it all down. And at the time, they said, we're taking it all down and we're going to rework Embarcadero Street into a boulevard that will take cars of a certain level, and we're going to allow the rest of the traffic to dissipate into the grid. And they did that, and the complaints about this is going to be the end of the world, it'll be congested all the time, we'll never get there. If you go there today, it's a phenomenally positive experience. They took it down to 2 lanes east and 2 lanes west there, depending on where you go, with bike lanes and pedestrian paths and a big median with transit on that. The streetcars go along there, and walking across it is a joy. It's pleasant, it's calm, it's decent, and the traffic just worked its way into the system. And it's a beautiful enhancement. It allowed all kinds of waterfront situations to happen, including the full renovation of the ferry building, so the ferry terminal building there. So it's one of the many, many examples where traffic calming and road diets and diminishing a street capacity can be an incredibly positive thing.
Are we designing a street or a city for cars, or are we designing it for people and residents? And I feel like that's the question we're constantly wrestling with in Detroit and in Metro Detroit in a variety of areas. And look, anything that makes Jefferson less like real life Frogger to cross is a good thing. And I mean, there's been some ideas floated over the years. I know that with the Grand Prix, they do like a bridge and some other stuff, but I feel like if you open up the palette to ideas, there could be some really creative solutions that could maybe even open up some new space and do some different things and change some of those traffic patterns, because we're not going to have that same office pattern ever again. And so a residential pattern will even be different. I wanted to ask you, Hart Plaza, I think also is another issue of an early design that didn't get fully executed. Isamu Noguchi, who designed that, sent angry letters to the city of Detroit for all the things that weren't done in the plan as far as greenery and all the other stuff. So there's almost like a kind of a throwback to, hey, let's get back to that a little bit, that more like human-centered approach.
It's one of those examples where quality versus quantity. One of the things we've really recognized and we've spent a lot of time studying is public space, and the public spaces that work and the ones that don't work, and why do they work and why don't they work? And we will sit there in a space and look, why is this not working? Why aren't people here? What's missing, or vice versa? Why is it so awesome? Why are people just teaming to come here and want to be there? What is it all about? So we do a lot of analysis, and we've done a lot of public space design, in our work. And I think the Hart Plaza situation is a quantity and quality situation. We have less quality of public space and a lot of quantity of public space. And it goes back to probably, some of the thoughts that Noguchi originally had. And I think the idea that intimate spaces and spaces that are really fully designed for pedestrians, and the enclosure. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful things about Capitol Park is what I love about Capitol Park. It's my favorite public space, maybe in America. It's phenomenal. Is the enclosure, is the scale, what we call the urban room, the feeling that you're in a space, and the space is created by what's around it and what encloses it. And it's sort of like a big embrace, And you miss that at Hart Plaza because it's open, obviously, to the river. It's so the Jefferson is so wide to the north that it's open that way, and the buildings that embrace it are too far away. As big as they are, and some of them are 50-story towers and the Renaissance Center, all that. But yet they're farther away. They're not embracing. So there's a sense of scale that you're missing there, and then of course the activity. It's so disconnected that there's not enough connection to where the people are, and you can't open a coffee shop or an ice cream shop or a restaurant or whatever if you can't have people, within a reasonable distance.
When I travel and I see public squares, like with a coffee shop just in the middle of it, or little vendors or things like that, it's those things that not only provide street life, not only provide texture, but they also provide smaller scale entrepreneurship and job opportunities, where it's like, oh, hey, I live in the city and I run a coffee shop in this triangle-shaped park over here or something. Those are the kinds of job opportunities that can be created out of this. They're not just about like large corporations. It really helps kind of get it into the community,
I think those adjacencies are critical and can't be overemphasized. The idea of being within a very close proximity to where people are. To get to Hart Plaza, is difficult. To get there and to be part of that, to get to the Renaissance Center is difficult. So you can't make it hard, or it can't be that difficult to get people. People want to go where it's comfortable, and they want to go where it's generally easy. And you can't make it an obstacle course to get you to where you want to be, which is one of the successes of what we're seeing in the center of downtown with Campus Martius. People are all around in all those buildings. They're right across the street. At lunch, you just come down, you go across the street, and you're in the middle of this great space. It's easy, it's visible, it's connected, and it's something that draws people. And the walking by allows more activity, and the more people come. And you can't just make it difficult. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, that the RenCen Center has always had and continues to have. And I think, unfortunately, unless we really seriously start looking at that connectivity to the adjacencies, I think that the Renaissance Center, no matter what we do, it will have some difficulties in the future.
And so how you program it will affect the kind of connectivity you do and things. But do you have any thoughts on what should be those next chapters? You think about those 4 towers, you think about everything else. Like, residential conversions are difficult. You know more about stuff than I do. You're an architect. So why don't we talk about that a little bit, and as far as the programming for it? And I guess for me as a Detroiter, I feel like there should be a focus on residential, but is that crazy? Tell me things I don't know.
No, it's not crazy. Matter of fact, I would say that's the number one recommendation, is that let's go back to the original intent that Portman had, which was to create essentially a small city there. I mean, I think that's part of his original idea. This was a mixed-use development that had all these sort of levels of activity.
A Renaissance Center neighborhood, if you will.
There was a thinking that this was big enough to be a city within a city, if you will. Now, I'm not an advocate of that in theory. I think that our neighborhoods and our city shouldn't be isolated. They should be integrated and connected. So the idea is that you can have a district or a neighborhood, but it should very well be connected, because the synergy from place to place to place to place is what makes a city really work. So you don't want to create Corktown and say, oh, Corktown's over there and we're going to disconnect it. We want Corktown to be part of downtown, or part of North Corktown, or part of the riverfront. That's when it really starts to work. So that's been the problem of downtown for many, many years. Midtown was disconnected from New Center, disconnected from downtown, from the Eastern Market, and all that. And those things, the more we connect it, the more it all works better. So this is what we want to see. We don't want to see the Renaissance Center become its own little city. We want it to become part of the city, but still activated at all times. And what makes little downtowns like Birmingham and Royal Oak and these places work is they're mixed use, they're walkable, and they're connected. They're connected to the neighborhoods. They're connected. There isn't a wall around downtown Birmingham or a wall around Ferndale. I mean, they're totally integrated with the neighborhoods. You're in the neighborhood, you walk down the street, and before you know it, you're at the Magic Bag Theater, or you're getting a dinner at one of the great restaurants, or that kind of thing. We need to think about this little neighborhood, this Renaissance Center, as an important sort of mixed-use environment that's totally connected. But I do think housing, which it was originally intended, should definitely be part of it. The hotel is a great thing. I could even see an additional hotel being done there, beyond what they already have, because we need more hotel space, and it's already a convention center convention hotel. So I could see an additional hotel, or an element that's in a hotel, maybe at a different scale or different type, different flag. And then I don't think office should go away. I think having office there is important. I think having some element of office. Now, we don't need necessarily 2.5 million square feet of office, which is what we have now.
Well, and those 2 smaller towers are owned by someone different and actually are leased out.
Yes, there's already office there. We have 4 major office buildings of 2 million square feet of office right now. They're not fully empty. There's some businesses in there still, and all, and I think will remain. But I could see, and I think in my sort of perfect vision at the without having to fully study this, I would see that in terms of use, is we look at a full-time mixed use. We add housing. We add other elements that will bring people in outside of the office days, which is sort of the 9 to 5 days a week, at night, on the weekends. And I think that's a couple of those buildings would make incredible residential. I think there's a real opportunity to convert some of those buildings into, or some parts of those, the 4 towers, office towers, into some level housing. And it would be very unique housing for Detroit. Riverfront housing, potentially with outdoor spaces that, you could articulate the building where the outdoor spaces are part of your unit. So you have a unit with outdoor spaces that look out. You're 30 stories
above. You could
above.
actually like change the glass wall of it, because that is something that a couple of things I've heard is one that, the building is showing its age in some ways as far as like heating, cooling efficiency. But two, like the idea of having all these apartments with no ability to see the outside or to be outside or let the fresh air in, that is a thing. And then also your size of floor plate. So, I mean, if you could change some of those things, if you change the outside of the building, it would also change how the building looks as well.
You would absolutely change the way it would look. And I think by essentially extracting some of those spaces and making them interior and exterior spaces within the footprint, is you would have essentially patio spaces or spaces
like a lanai.
I mean, if this is like a balcony that's within the building, that would be an outdoor interior space, and then you'd have a 30 stories sort of view of the waterfront and Canada and the city. I mean, I think one of the things about cities that we love is the variety. There's so many different things, different places to eat, places to work, places to live. It's a townhouse, it's a high rise, it's a single family. I mean, these are places that we like the variety. We want the variety, and that's what makes cities exciting. So I think the idea of having these high rise buildings that are, taller than most anywhere in the city that could be residential, and then have this integrated outdoor space on a waterfront circumstance that's connected to the river walk and all the beautiful things that we've created, is something that would be a very unique type of housing that we don't have right now, or not much of anyway.
And if you claim some of that space as outdoor space, you also work with some of the issues that I've heard about floor plates, because those floor plates on those 4 towers are gigantic. And tell me if I'm wrong, and tell me if I've heard wrong, but a number of experts have said older buildings are easier to convert to residential because you have more jigs and jags and air and things like that. Newer buildings have these giant floor plates that sometimes you end up with units with that, like, it's hard to cut the units out of them because the floor plates are so big.
Footprints of a building is a big part. Housing, you need certain depths, you need certain widths and things like that in order for it to be a logical sort of housing project. And yes, that's definitely a concern if the footprint is too big. I think that these footprints may be bigger, arguably bigger than we would want, but I think there are ways of addressing that by creative articulation. There are a lot of ways of doing things, and I think that I really do believe when there's a will, there's a way, and I think you look for something that's unique and distinctive. And I think we have a lot of those things here in this property, and I do believe that there's real opportunity here to do something very exciting and see that building be very prosperous going forward.
Well, Mark Nickita, co-founder and president of Archive DS. What a conversation. Went a little bit longer, but I think we had a lot of fun. And really, I hope people walk away with an appreciation for this building and the city and connecting it all together. And I appreciate all of your thoughts, and we should do it again sometime.
Anytime. It was a lot of fun.
All right. I would love to hear your feedback on today's show. dailydetroit@gmail.com or 313-789-3211. By the way, if you haven't, tell a friend about the Daily Detroit podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts and wherever you download your favorite shows. With that, I am Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.